Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Murphy. I have the honor of representing Connecticut in the United States Senate. Today, I'm sending a letter to the acting Secretary of Defense asking for a full review of the processes necessary for the military to defend the United States Capitol from attack. I hope to be able to release the text of this letter to you in a matter of minutes or hours. I apologize that we don't have the text of the letter. We're sending it with a handful of other members of Congress and just finalizing the details of it. But let me tell you about the reason for it. On Wednesday, it was clear early on that the Capitol Police did not have the manpower or the ability to defend the United States Capitol from invasion and insurrection. And yet it took 4 hours for the Department of Defense, specifically the National Guard, to get any kind of troop presence to defend the Capitol from attack. That is unconscionable. That is unacceptable. This is America's temple of democracy, the United States Capitol. Inside it that day was the joint session of the United States Congress, virtually every member of the Senate, every member of the House, and the number 1, 2, and 3 in the line of succession to the presidency. We are going to have to ask a lot of questions about why the Capitol Police weren't able to protect the complex from attack. But one of the key questions is why we weren't able to draw upon Department of Defense resources much more quickly in order to prevent that debacle from occurring on Wednesday. Let me tell you a little bit about the state of the existing law. Right now, we require the mayor of the city and the chief of Capitol Police to make a request to the National Guard for protection. Now, in this case, as we know, the mayor made a request to the National Guard for help. That request was approved with limitations. The Guard was sent to do traffic duty around the White House and was not equipped with the lethal means that the Guard normally possesses. The Capitol Police did not make a request to the Guard to deploy and pre-position resources around the United States Capitol. That afternoon, when it was clear that the Capitol was going to be breached and that the Capitol Police could not protect it, they began the process of requesting assistance to the Capitol. But that process, as we've learned, was cumbersome and laborious. It apparently included getting sign-off from the board of directors of the Capitol Police, a process that looks like it took at least 30 to 60 minutes. And so by the time the Capitol Police and the mayor had gone through the process of requesting the National Guard deployment, it was 2:30. At 2:30, I was being evacuated from the United States Capitol and on the way to a safe room. It was crystal clear by 2:30 that the Capitol Police couldn't defend the building, and yet it took until 2:30 for even a request to be made to the Department of Defense for assistance. After the request was made, it took 3 hours for troops to arrive at the complex. Now, there's good reason why it took 3 hours. We rely on the National Guard to defend the United States Capitol. The National Guard, of course, are individuals who have other jobs. And so while there was a handful of National Guard personnel doing traffic duty that day, the National Guard that had to be brought to the United States Capitol had to leave their other jobs, had to go get into uniform, had to muster at the armory before they could arrive to defend the Capitol. You can see how many breakdowns occurred. First, the refusal to pre-position National Guard assets. Second, the delay in making the request for National Guard relief. But then third, the amount of time that it actually took troops to arrive at the Capitol. To me, Wednesday is a before and after moment. We need to take a look at radical reform in the way that the Capitol is protected, in part because I don't think this insurgency is over. Obviously, there are big questions about what these lunatics are planning for this weekend and next week. But I think you have to assume that this insurgency against the federal government is going to continue into 2021. And there will be many other moments at which either the White House or the Capitol complex is at risk. Never again can it take 4 hours for the military to come to the defense of the Capitol or the White House. Ask yourself this: why on earth do we spend $700 billion on the military every year if it can't even protect the U.S. Capitol from attack? Now, there are rules in place about when active duty troops can be involved in domestic crowd control. And there are good reasons for that, right? We had a whole debate earlier this year about the belief that troops were being overused in the control of peaceful demonstrations. But included in this review has to be a question of whether the National Guard is actually equipped and ready and sufficient to protect the Capitol, or whether we need a quicker ability for active duty forces that exist in and around Washington, D.C. to be able to come to the Capitol's defense. It may be that the protocols and the structures we have in place right now to defend the Capitol and the White House are wholly insufficient for this new moment that we exist in today, when there is some kind of organized insurgency to the federal government that still exists and still presents a threat to our government. So the letter that I'm going to be sending to the Acting Secretary of Defense today will ask for a complete review of both the statutes and the protocols around how the Department of Defense reacts to threats to the United States Capitol, and for changes to be put in place as soon as possible. Yes, we are going to have a lot bigger presence in and around the Capitol for the next 30 days. There are thousands of National Guard troops that are now permanently deployed to protect the Capitol and to protect the inauguration. But that presence is only guaranteed for 30 days. And if we are not going to have a permanent force encircling the Capitol, which is not my wish, then we have to have the ability for the military to be able to respond to an attack within 30 to 60 minutes, not 4 to 5 hours, as happened on Wednesday. So we are all, I think, working jointly together on efforts to learn lessons from Wednesday and to make the reforms necessary to have a successful and peaceful inauguration. But I think we are all also working on individual issues which draw particular concern for me. This issue of the nature of the military's response is very concerning. I have spoken directly to the Secretary of the Army about this already. I had several conversations with the Chief of the Capitol Police prior to his resignation. I spoke to many of my colleagues over the weekend about this, and I plan to pursue it in the coming days, and we'll be sending this correspondence to the Department of Defense within the next several hours. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. Yeah, that's a part of what we're working on, so I'd love for this to be bipartisan, and we're working on it. I'm going to send it today even if it is just a handful of senators. The hope is that it'll be bipartisan.
The former chief of Capitol Police told the Washington Post that he asked for National Guard to be pre-positioned, and that the two sergeants at arms pushed back for reasons of optics and other reasons. Are you aware of that? And is this anything that's consistent with the conversation you had with the chief, I believe, the day after?
It's not consistent with my conversation with the chief. That's not to say that his allegation isn't true, but I spoke at length with the chief at 11 o'clock on Wednesday night and at 9 a.m. on Thursday morning. And in neither of those conversations did he mention he had wanted presence from the National Guard. And in fact, in both of those conversations, he defended to me the decision to go it alone without National Guard support. He told me and others that were on that, there was a handful of us on those calls from the Appropriations Committee. He told us in both of those conversations that they had no reason to believe there was going to be a crowd that big or as aggressive, and that they did not believe they needed National Guard support. So I was surprised to see his comments today. But again, this speaks to the complexity of the approval process that exists today. I mean, I think we just have to ask ourselves, should it require the consensus of the two sergeant-at-arms and the chief of police in order to get National Guard presence to the Capitol? Because if you require three people to be unanimous in their decision about how to protect the Capitol, you may not be able to protect the Capitol.
The Department of Defense is also pointing fingers that D.C. officials about their delay in making that request, and be prepared for what happened.
Well, I mean, Mayor Bowser asked for presence. She got it, but she got it with conditions, and she, is not the primary person responsible for defense of the United States Capitol. So, I don't, and to be honest, municipal police arrived very quickly. It was the Guard and DOD assets that took a long time. So Mayor Bowser got the municipal police to the Capitol very, very quickly. I think what we've learned is that there is a really complicated accountability structure for defense of the Capitol that involves the House Sergeant of Arms, the Senate Sergeant of Arms, the Chief of Police of the Capitol, the Mayor of the city, the Department of Defense. We're going to, especially as we head to the inauguration, we are going to have a unified command structure for defense of the Capitol, in which there is one person making decisions, not 10. And my point is that, well, that's important for the purposes of January 20th. That is also important for the purposes of August 20th and September 20th and October 20th, because I don't think you can assume that this is the last time that something like this is going to happen.
Your two chambers, co-equal chambers of a co-equal legislative branch. So, why one person? I mean, I don't. Do you think you could get one? Such a situation? Because it would seem to me that maybe people in the House might have one perspective, people in the Senate have another perspective, and it's not exactly like you guys listen to each other when the other chamber tells the other chamber what to do.
Yeah, so right. So your question is whether this is feasible. I think we have to make it feasible. I think in the wake of this national tragedy, we have to accept that the bureaucracy of a bicameral legislature got in the way of a more effective defense of the building. And so, maybe in a perfect world, the House and the Senate would both like to have a debate as to whether or not we bring the National Guard in to protect the building. I think we've got to consolidate this decision-making structure and give up a little bit of power from the House and the Senate, respectively.
The mayor of Washington, D.C. is responsible for the safety of the streets of Washington, D.C., on which those protesters marched, on which they headed down to the Capitol. So in any kind of congressional review, shouldn't you, you're going to be looking at everybody, right? The mayor, the police, the Pentagon, the Capitol Police, the sergeants at arms. I
don't mean for my remarks here today to suggest that I don't think there should be accountability for everyone involved. So I'm calling this press conference to announce the release of this specific letter on this specific issue of Department of Defense response and the protocols in place to call in military support to the Capitol. But there are, listen, this was a systemic, massive failure. And everyone is going to bear some responsibility for what went wrong here. I just think that right now there's been a lot of focus on the Capitol Police, and to my mind, not enough focus on why it took so long for the United States military to get there. And some people have sort of suggested, well, you know, it's the National Guard. That's just how long the National Guard takes to get to the Capitol. We can't accept that any longer. We can't accept a world in which it takes 4 hours for the United States military to defend the U.S. Capitol from attack. And admittedly, as I said, there are differences when the attack is from a foreign threat versus a domestic threat. But you've got to be able to mobilize much more quickly than we did and they did.
So a lot of what you're talking about was the bureaucracy in calling up the delay. So let's be clear. How confident are you about the security of the inaugural on January 20th?
I am worried that there is not yet a very clear, unified command structure for defense of the inauguration. I think we are learning lessons in real time. I think normally Secret Service takes primary responsibility for inaugural security. But I think in prior inaugurations, because there hasn't been as active a threat, there has been a diffusion of responsibility, and I don't think we can afford that this time around. So I do think there are active lessons being learned right now. There are conversations happening today about building a command structure for the inauguration that allows for very quick decisions to be made. I think if you look at the command structure that existed for prior inaugurations and you hypothesized what would happen if there was a attack on the inauguration, you would find that there was a lot of people who had to say yes before a response was mustered. And so I think we're trying to fix that right now. But I will say, it is not easy to do that when you don't have a Secretary of Defense and when you don't have a Secretary of Homeland Security. It is hard to do that when the president doesn't give a crap about the security of the inauguration. President Trump is still in charge. And part of the reason why Congress is talking about impeachment right now is because he is not being helpful in trying to guarantee the security of the inauguration. In fact, he seems to be doing more harm than good. And so as we try to make sure that the inauguration happens without incident, it appears to many of us that the only way we can guarantee that is to have somebody else in the commander-in-chief's role, because the current commander-in-chief is not working on trying to make sure the inauguration is peaceful.
Do you see a way to, there's no way for impeachment to lead to him being out of office before the point. Given that, do you think that you and other Democratic senators should be preferring for the Senate to launch a trial should there be articles passed? Is it still worth it, considering that the impeachment would occur, the conviction would occur after the term?
Well, there's not, listen, this is an exceptional moment in America's history like no other we've seen. And exceptional things can happen at an exceptional moment. Listen, I think right now there are not likely anywhere close to the number of Republican votes you'd need to remove the president. I think there are many Republicans who are watching the president's behavior very closely and would support a speedy conviction if he starts inciting a move on the inauguration. So I think it's important to have these articles in front of the Senate so that we could act on them expeditiously if Republicans came to the conclusion that the only thing that could prevent an attack on the inauguration was the removal of the president. I don't think they are convinced of that right now, but I think it's important for the articles to be in front of the Senate in order to have that possibility even exist.
And assuming the status quo, if there is such a thing, do you think it symbolically or legally matters whether the Senate starts the trial before the inauguration, even if it finishes afterward?
I haven't thought about that. I don't have an
Do
answer
you
for that.
think the president can have adequate time to prepare and present the defense to articles
I mean, what we're talking about is, the security of our country and the peaceful transition of power. Impeachment may be necessary because the president is leading a revolt against the United States government. I mean, it's unbelievable that I'm even saying those words out loud. But if that is in fact the case, and the president spends the next 10 days trying to muster an army of his fanatics to march on the inauguration, then I don't think that our primary concern would be whether he has enough time to mount an adequate defense to impeachment. Our primary concern would be to get him out of office so that democracy can continue for at least another 4 years.
Do his tweets followed by his speech, do they constitute sufficient evidence to convict him of incitement?
Oh, well, let me read the articles of impeachment. I mean, listen, I've been clear that we should begin an impeachment process. You're asking me to sort of render a judgment on the articles. Let me read the articles before I render a judgment. But yes, but the president clearly incited those protesters to march on the Capitol. He should have known, and he did know, what the possibility was once they arrived. He has continued to inflame the situation since then. He has made things worse, not better, even after 4 people died. The totality of his conduct is clearly worthy of impeachment or removal from office. And I'm not even sure that many of my Republican colleagues disagree with that. I think many of my Republican colleagues don't want to move forward with impeachment because they don't think we have enough time, or they think that we should be focusing on other things. But yeah, his conduct is clearly worthy of impeachment.
Are you satisfied that he has conceded the election?
No, I mean, that video, looked like a hostage video. I mean, that was written for him. He wasn't happy saying it, and you could tell he wasn't happy saying it. And by the next morning, he was tweeting out once again that he wasn't showing up to the inauguration, a statement that clearly undermined the idea that he had conceded the election and Joe Biden was the legitimate president. So the tweet the next morning seemed to be a clear signal to his followers to ignore what I said last night.
Stand by. What's your position on the 14th Amendment for members of the House and Senate who voted for the rejecting the Electoral College?
I haven't come to any conclusion on that. Listen, I think it's important for us to have a conversation about consequences for individuals, at very least the individuals who led the effort to try to overturn the election results, but I haven't come to the conclusion as to whether that merits censure or expulsion. I don't have an answer for that yet. I'd have to sort of study the history of it.
Well, should members of Congress who might be held accountable or might be seen as responsible for egging on that crowd or inciting that crowd, shouldn't they also? I mean, shouldn't you guys be doing if you're ready to impeach and remove the President of the United States, shouldn't you also be willing to turn a critical eye inward and take action regarding your own? I mean, nobody else can, but the Senate and the House can discipline their members.
Well, I think the immediate threat to the safety of the nation is the President of the United States. You know, these people follow his every word in a way that they do not for members of the United States Senate or the House of Representatives. So the President bears a special responsibility. His words have a special ability to incite, and it is why we are appropriately focused on whether we can have a peaceful transition of power with this president in office. I think you're not wrong that we need to look inward, but this is an emergency, right? The emergency requires that we do extraordinary things to make sure that we don't have a second rebellion. And right now, the question of accountability for members of Congress is not as central to the preservation of democracy as the question of accountability for the president.
The Vice President goes forward, or to his board member, and goes to 2021. Do you think Congress should go forward with impeachment anyway and possibly office?
No. No, if the 25th Amendment, if the 25th Amendment process is used, then there is not reason, in my mind, for the Congress to move forward with impeachment.
I mean, you're saying kind of the state capitol. As you make this call federally, is there any concern locally, or have you had any conversations locally? We're in our state capitol. We're seeing barriers. It's a different place than it was a week ago. What's that like? Yeah,
I've had extensive conversations with the governor, with Commissioner Ravella. I will be on the phone later today with the special agent, with the FBI special agent in charge. Listen, clearly there is information out there regarding armed marches on state capitals, as well as the United States Capitol, and I am hopeful that we won't see anything serious here in Connecticut. But what we learned on Wednesday is to prepare for the worst case and not assume the best case. And so I've been in close touch with state officials to make sure that effective communication is happening between the FBI, federal government, and state government. It appears that that communication is happening, and there's robust coordination between state officials, the Department of Public Safety, and federal officials. But I will continue those efforts, and I've advised the state leadership to be prepared in a way that we weren't prepared in Washington.
In the Capitol building, when all this stuff went down, can you just sort of describe what you were feeling when it became clear that the security forces couldn't, protect the building? You guys had to abandon it?
Yeah, I was in the Senate chamber and learned, via social media that they had breached the building, and it was shortly thereafter that the Senate debate was suspended and the chamber was locked down. I never, felt that, my safety was immediately in danger. It was clearly a harrowing experience, one that I don't desire to go through again. But at the same time, we were in the Senate chamber in lockdown for about 15 to 20 minutes. We were then evacuated into the safe room, and at no point, did I have any direct or immediate confrontation with the rioters. And I'm grateful to the Capitol Police officers who protected us in the chamber and who helped lead us to safety. Others of my colleagues had very different experiences. So there were House members that were within earshot of the gunfire, were very close to the protesters. There were senators who got stuck outside of the Senate chamber who had different experiences than I did.
Beyond the delayed response time, what could be gone with so unprepared with enough meetings and made their intentions quite clear in the lead up to the siege?
I mean, this is one of the big outstanding questions, why we didn't see this coming. If you've been tracking QAnon and QAnon message boards, that movement is built around this nonsensical idea of a storm, and that there was plenty of traffic about January 6th being the storm. That alone should have given you a sign that something bad could happen. So, listen, clearly there should have been pre-positioned National Guard forces there. If they had been there in significant numbers, it may be that there would have never been a breach of the security line, never mind the Capitol itself. Your question is why? Obviously we don't have the answer to that yet. A lot of people have asked, is there a double standard, right? Why was the National Guard standing in front of the Capitol for the BLM protests and they weren't when it was Donald Trump's supporters who marched on the Capitol? I mean, I've said since Wednesday, I certainly believe there's a double standard. I think that if these were Black Lives Matter protesters, they would have been treated much more roughly and there would have been thousands of them in jail. So I do think there was a double standard, and that double standard probably extended to preparation.
Senator, if he's not impeached, he could run for office again. Are you okay with that?
Part of impeachment can be the invalidation of future eligibility for office. And so that would clearly be one of the questions that we would, that we would pursue as part of impeachment. So, but let's be honest, he's gonna be a major political figure in this country, regardless of whether he's impeached or not. And so and his movement, which is now a violent movement, is not going away either. So we are unfortunately going to live in a world in which the things Donald Trump says over the next 4 years, puts the safety of our country at risk on a minute-by-minute basis. We will be able to lock up a lot of these folks. We will put some of the leaders of this effort in jail for a long time. But, he's still going to be a menace, whether or not he's president and whether or not he's eligible to run for office in the future.
On social media platforms, kind of going along these lines of, they're private companies, but they're now censoring. I mean, is that a freedom of speech issue? What's your take?
Well, they're not censoring, right? Censoring is a government action. They are private companies that are not obligated to partake in the overthrow of their government. So, this idea that a private company is required to allow insurrection to be planned on its platform is ludicrous. That they do not have that responsibility, and in fact, they have a moral responsibility to disallow it. So, I think I think that while I applaud these platforms from taking down Parler, it is probably just a matter of time before Parler is back up and running and once again available to this right-wing lunacy. So I think there's a limit to how much these companies can sort of stuff the genie back in the bottle, but it is their moral and patriotic obligation to not participate in seditious conduct.
Senator, what's your view of the role of guns, especially black guns, in this insurgency, this movement? There were not guns brandished inside the Capitol by any members of the invading mob, to my awareness. What's your view of that? Do you see it as parallel in some way? Do you see it as one thing is a peaceful movement and the other is not? What's your view? You've talked a lot, obviously, about guns since 2013,
yeah.
2012.
Well, these calls online right now for activity on the 17th and the 19th and the 20th include calls for individuals to bring weapons to these protests. So, we're still trying to get a read on how many weapons were amongst the crowd on the 6th. That call to action did not include a request to bring weapons, right? Whereas this one does.
There were accommodations.
So I think you have to be much more worried about the upcoming activities and whether they are going to be more heavily armed. And listen, this is amongst the top 10 most important debates right now. Question of assault weapons laws is not on it. But, I mean, you know, for those of us who have been concerned about the proliferation of AR-15s, one of our fears has been that law enforcement will get outgunned. And, you know, we have thought about that more in the context of active shooter incidences. But, you know, these are military-style weapons, and if you're involved in a shootout outside of the United States Capitol and the protesters have weapons that are just as powerful as yours and designed to kill as many people as quickly as possible, that's a big problem.
Do you see parallels or big differences, or a little of both, between the Second Amendment rights / anti-gun control movement and this attack on the government?
I mean, that sounds like a little bit more complicated question than I can answer off the top of my head. I mean, I think this is a cult of personality mixed with a sort of QAnon cult following. I mean, this is really about a cult of personality surrounding Donald Trump and individuals who are intent in keeping him in power no matter what. I think that's primarily the organizing feature of these folks.
Open carry, concealed carry, do you have to have a DC permit? I mean, does anybody who show up with a firearm will be in trouble if they don't live in DC and have a DC issued permit?
Yeah, I don't know all those all those off the top of my head. Yeah, but obviously, listen, Connecticut is is an open carry state, and so that's one of the things that I talked to the.
You can't carry on the Capitol.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Appreciate it.